Thank you, IDOS, and a heartfelt thanks to Dr. Amit and the entire team at Indore Ophthalmic Society. Thank you very much for staying up till 10 p.m. for a uveitis talk. It's always a pleasure to speak on uveitis and to be back in MP. So I'll be talking about management of infectious versus non-infectious uveitis. So just to brush up this diagram, uvea is the middle vascular layer of the eye protected by the cornea and sclera. It contributes blood supply to the retina and it's composed of choroid, ciliary body and iris. Uveitis is inflammation of the inside of the eye affecting one or more So this is the definition of uveitis. It is the third leading cause of irreversible blindness, and the incidence is 14 to 50 per 100,000 and prevalence is 0.73%. I'll take a little time to explain the basics of uveitis and why it is important to differentiate infectious from non-infectious uveitis. So from our MBBS days, we know that thymus is the purveyor of central tolerance. So thymus is a gland where self-reactive T cells are deactivated, okay, and they are not allowed to go into the circulation. These autoreactive T cells are non-tolerized to the retinal protein, to the retinal antigens. But this central tolerance is not foolproof, and some of these autoreactive cells might escape into the periphery. Okay, so once the thymus is not able to control, they might go into the periphery, and here there is peripheral tolerance. So when these autoreactive T cells do not meet their cognate antigen, which means they do not meet any retinal protein in the circulation, and they do not meet any cross-reacting antigens like bacteria, virus, anything, they get deactivated. But again, peripheral tolerance is also not foolproof. So these autoreactive T cells are circulating in your blood. If they come across a retinal antigen, as in sympathetic ophthalmia, or they come across a cross-reactive antigen like tuberculous bacilli or any virus, now they get activated. These autoreactive T cells, when they are presented with an antigen presenting cells, they get activated and they release pro-inflammatory cytokines, and now there is clonal expansion and they get converted to T helper cells. Okay, so they undergo clonal expansion and they form T helper cells. Now the thymus again tries to control these T helper cells by sending T regulator cells from the thymus. Okay, but then it's very difficult to control the lymphocytes once they are activated, and they might get extravasated into various tissues, and some might reach the eye. Now once they are inside the eye, they meet their cognate antigen. They meet the retinal proteins, and there is breakdown of blood-retinal barrier, and there is a recruitment of leukocytes from the periphery, and there is a downstream segment of events where there is uveitis. Now there is inflammation inside the eye, and inflamed eye sends signal to the spleen, and the spleen also sends T regulator cells, and then there is a balance where T helper cells are also controlled, and there is inflammation also inside the eye. So the entire process has been started by the antigen. Okay, so this antigen may be infectious or non-infectious, and depending on what it is, we need to control it. And that is why the central dogma of treatment of uveitis is to differentiate infection from non-infectious cases. With this, I'll start my presentation about cases. So coming to the anterior segment signs, I will just show the clinical signs here. So if you see broad-based posterior synechia, even if you don't know anything about history okay, about the patient. If you see broad-based posterior synechia, please think about tuberculosis, please think about infection. And try not to give local steroids in these cases. If you see peripheral anterior synechia without any posterior synechia, or posterior synechia in the form of this filiform posterior synechia here, okay, then think about sarcoidosis. This is a very important differentiating point between TB and sarcoid. Coming to the types of hypopion, you can make the patient lie down. The hypopion will be mobile, and this is a case of Behçet's uveitis, which is non-infectious. It is very typical of Behçet's. Sometimes this is the only sign that the patient might have. If you see a non-granulomatous uveitis with a thick hypopion and fibrin stuck to the anterior lens capsule, think about HLA-B27 associated uveitis. Again, sometimes in younger patients or very old patients, it is very difficult to differentiate it from endophthalmitis. So in cases of endophthalmitis, the reaction is very fulminant, and you will see a convex-shaped thick hypopion. Okay, and think about infection. In a young child with bilateral hypopion, always think about HLA-B27 associated JIA. Okay. So this is a very important sign, bilateral hypopion in a child. Do not think about endogenous ENDOF. Coming to scleritis, this is a patient who was being treated for allergic conjunctivitis, but if you lift the upper lid, you can see a nodule there. And I asked the patient, he did not have an accident or anything, but you still see a scar there, okay, and right at the nose. So this is a case of herpetic nodular scleritis, and here the corneal sensations are also reduced, and with treatment you see the scar has also become faint. So in a case of scleritis, before looking at the eye, just look at the patient. This is a young girl with bilateral nodular scleritis. So cases with bilateral nodular scleritis are usually non-infectious, and again if you look at the ear is warm, red and tender, and this patient had polychondritis. Okay. Coming to the next case, suppurative scleritis. Suppurative scleritis as a rule is infectious. This patient had fungal scleritis, and this was the response to treatment. Now this is another case of suppurative scleritis. Now here the difference is that there is a perilimbal lucency there, and you can see corneal infiltrates. You can see corneal infiltrates here with lucency near the limbus. Okay, there is a clear limbus, and then there are corneal infiltrates. Now this is a case of non-infectious scleritis. So in an infectious scleritis, if the cornea is involved, it will be in continuation with the sclera. But if it is non-infectious or autoimmune scleritis, you will see an area of clear limbus between the infiltrate and the scleritis. And of course, you can also notice the saddle nose deformity. So this is a case of Wegener's granulomatosis. Coming to signs of intermediate uveitis. So this is a patient where you see vitritis, lot of snowballs, and there is a scar underlying a occluded blood vessel. Okay, so a chorioretinal scar underlying an occluded blood vessel with lot of snowballs is suggestive of tuberculosis. Now, how do you differentiate it from sarcoidosis, which is non-infectious? In sarcoidosis, you will see very few snowballs, hardly one or two, along with these depigmented lesions in the periphery. Okay, these depigmented lesions in the periphery. So this is non-infectious intermediate uveitis. Now, what are the types of vitritis that you might encounter? So many times we just see and write vitritis plus. Okay, you can write more. So uveitis is confusing because we are not going into details. So once we go into details of a case, then you start enjoying it. So this is a case, the first case of vitritis with vitreous membranes. when you see vitritis and these vitreous membranes floating, so this is suggestive of leptospirosis. When you see vitreous membranes with string of pearls, you notice the string of pearls here. So this is suggestive of sarcoidosis. Again, you see vitreous opacities. You can not make out moving cells. So when you take the slit lamp and focus behind the lens, the cells move. But when you don't see any movement, it's just vitreous opacities, then it is suggestive of Fuchs uveitis, because many times in our population it is very difficult to appreciate hypochromia of the iris. Coming to cases of retinitis. So retinitis is almost always infectious. So multifocal retinitis with macular star, branch retinal artery occlusion is post-fever retinitis, and this is the way this disease might present. And depending on where you're practicing, you might see the cause because of typhoid or chikungunya or rickettsial infections. So whatever be the cause, even if it is viral, it is always important to treat with doxycycline, not because of its antibiotic action, but because it reduces the retinal ischemia. So whenever you're treating with steroids also, always give 100 mg doxycycline BD for 2 weeks. A very confusing picture might be seen when you might get confused with cotton wool spots and multifocal retinitis. So if you do an OCT, you will see vitritis. You can see vitritis on OCT. There is inner retinal hyperreflectivity, subretinal fluid in a case of post-fever retinitis. This is a patient who was being treated with steroids. This is a patient of SLE. She had hypertensive retinopathy, and here you can see the dilated tortuous vessel there. These are actually cotton wool spots with flame-shaped hemorrhages. So here you do not see vitritis. You do not see vitritis. There is inner retinal hyperreflectivity, that is ischemia because of the cotton wool spots, and subretinal fluid. So always differentiate hypertensive retinopathy from post-fever retinitis because of the difference in management. Coming to acute retinal necrosis. Acute retinal necrosis is the most common cause of medico-legal cases in uveitis because the lesions are in the far periphery. They are yellowish white, well circumscribed, necrotizing retinitis, and you always see vitritis. ARN is something where you always see vitritis unless the patient is HIV positive. This should be differentiated from hyperviscosity syndrome that is seen in patients with multiple myeloma. So this is another patient who was being treated as a case of acute retinal necrosis. But here if you see, there is no arteriolar occlusion. Here that you see the retinal arterioles are occluded. Here there is no occlusion. You can see hemorrhages and the lesions are very diffuse. They are not well circumscribed. And of course there is no vitritis. So multiple myeloma patients, sometimes as an ophthalmologist, I have diagnosed cases and sent to the oncologist. So it's very important to have this entity in mind. Coming to syphilis, the great masquerader. But there are some typical findings. You see that there is ground glass retinochoroiditis, this whitish appearance, and this superficial retinal infiltrates with a hyperemic disc. Always keep this picture in mind, and for every case of uveitis, it is better to do a TPHA. Now, how do you differentiate it from Behçet's? Now, Behçet's is the only cause of non-infectious retinitis. Here again, the retinal infiltrates are superficial, but you do not see that whitish placoid retinochoroiditis that you see in syphilis. Okay, and it is a non-granulomatous panuveitis. And of course, the FFA picture where there is fern pattern leak is quite typical of Behçet's, but it might be seen in other cases of vasculitis also, but it helps differentiate it from syphilis. Coming to cases of retinochoroiditis. So the typical finding in toxoplasma retinochoroiditis is headlight in the fog appearance, but sometimes you might see retinochoroiditis without the dense vitritis. But this is a typical picture that you will see that there is a taut posterior hyaloid, there is full thickness retinal hyperreflectivity, and an elevation of the RPE, meaning that there is choroiditis also. If the RPE is flat, it is very, very unlikely to be toxoplasmosis. So sometimes lymphoma can be confused with toxoplasmosis. Young patients can also present with vitreoretinal lymphoma. Here you will see that there are subretinal deposits. Okay, this is quite different from the RP elevation that you see here. Okay, you see a big bump there. There is nodularity of the RPE also, and of course there is leopard skin appearance. So important to differentiate toxoplasma and lymphoma. Sometimes they might have confounding features. Coming to retinal vasculitis. So TB is the most important retinal vasculitis that we must know. Here the lesions are, the vasculitis presents as skip lesions. The vasculitis the vascular cuffing is not continuous. Okay, you see that there are skip areas. There is vascular tortuosity that you see. There are subvascular choroiditis lesions, okay, with deep retinal hemorrhages. So TB vasculitis is almost always an occlusive vasculitis. There are cases of hyperhomocystinemia, which are often confused with TB vasculitis because most of us are MON2 positive. So if a patient is MON2 positive with no other sign of tuberculosis, no chest X-ray signs or no HRCT signs, and you see this kind of a picture, there is no vascular cuffing. There are just occluded vessels with neovascularization and some vitreous hemorrhage. Always look for hyperhomocystinemia. You can get a serum homocysteine done, and do not treat these patients with anti-TB therapy, which is very toxic. Coming to choroiditis. So serpiginous choroiditis, there are very few cases of non-infectious serpiginous choroiditis that we see, but the picture is very typical. They will start near the disc, okay, and they move in a serpiginoid fashion, like in a snake-like fashion, like here, okay, from here to there, and there will be a leading edge. If you differentiate it from serpiginous-like choroiditis, there will be vitritis, and the lesions are randomly distributed throughout the fundus, and they are almost of the same age. It does not progress like a serpiginous. Okay, you have multifocal lesions which coalesce later. And of course, you see vitritis, and serpiginous-like choroiditis is usually unilateral. This is a very common case that we see, VKH. Here you see that there are subretinal septae with bacillary layer detachment and a boggy choroid. Okay, whenever you are suspecting VKH, look for a boggy choroid, because this you might see in many diseases. You might see subretinal fluid in many diseases, but this boggy choroid is important. Now here if you see, you don't see the boggy choroid. Okay, so you have to think of something else. So this is optic neuropathy. This is TB optic neuropathy, and just with ATT, this is the response. Now this patient was being treated as a case of VKH. Okay, but if you see that there is lot of hyperautofluorescence that you see here, in the OCT also you see that there is a lumpy, bumpy choroid. Okay, there is subretinal fluid, but it is not looking like a typical case of VKH. Okay, you don't see so much of hyperreflectivity of the RPE. So you see these elongated shaggy photoreceptors, loss of ellipsoid zone, and subretinal fluid with hyperreflective speckles. So this was a case of thyroid cancer that had metastasized to the choroid, and if you see this, this is a case of VKH. So if you see VKH, there is RP undulation is much smoother, and you don't see the RP nodularity that you see in a case of choroidal metastasis. So always keep this differential diagnosis in mind. Coming to choroidal granuloma, so this is a tuberculoma. Tuberculoma are usually in the posterior pole. They are solitary, and on OCT you will see a contact sign. So there is elevation of the RPE, There is a huge choroidal granuloma here. You can see subretinal fluid and outer retinal hyperreflectivity. To differentiate it from sarcoid granulomas can be in the periphery. They are multiple and they are more commonly associated with subretinal fluid and vasculitis. Again, very important to differentiate granulomas from mascarads. So this is a case where you see this leopard skin appearance, but this is not a granuloma. You cannot see a granuloma, a distinct round granuloma in the choroid. So there is plateau-shaped elevation, again shaggy photoreceptors, subretinal fluid, wavy RPE and hyperreflective speckles. But if you compare it with granulomas, all granulomas are round. All granulomas are round. This is not plateau-shaped. So this was again a metastasis from a lung cancer. So to summarize, a unilateral or asymmetric case is usually infectious. Bilateral or asymmetric or alternating is usually non-infectious. Vitritis is usually dense in infectious uveitis. Retinitis is almost always infectious. Classification into granulomatous and non-granulomatous is key to arrive at a differential diagnosis. And in case of atypical clinical presentation, keep mascarides in mind, especially in the elderly. Thank you.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Dipanshu. I have a question. In your post-fever retinitis cases management, do you do blood investigations as a preliminary test, or do you straight away start treating with doxycycline?
Yes, I do.
What is the panel do you follow?
So I generally rule out rickettsial infections. Typhoid, I generally don't do unless patients give history of recent diarrhea or vomiting infection. Otherwise, I generally do my rickettsial panel, and I always do TPHA.
Yeah.
Okay.
Syphilis can be a
Yes.
mascarade. And do you also add steroids to that? Oral steroids?
Steroids I generally don't add unless there is significant subretinal fluid. So I have patients who've not had subretinal fluid, and just with doxycycline they have resolved beautifully.
But on follow-up, how do you decide if you have to start the patient on oral steroid?
Once you start doxycycline, I follow the patient up after 5 days. So if you do that, you see that there is significant improvement in vision, and even if there is a small subretinal fluid,
That might go
with
away.
doxycycline it does come down.
Come down.
So you can give topical Nepafinac and doxycycline, and steroid is the last thing that I want to add, because the problem with post-fever retinitis is that we still do not know whether it is an immune-mediated thing or whether there is active retinal infection. Because if you see that there are studies which show that I think there is a study in 1960 where they have shown in vitro that rickettsial organisms need the glutathione or something that is released by the photoreceptors. So probably it is an active infection. So that's why steroid is, I delay the steroids for at least 2 weeks.
Enlightening
How
presentation.
extensive should be the workup after first attack of acute iridocyclitis?
Sir, if it is a first episode of non-granulomatous uveitis, I generally investigate with HLA-B27, every patient, in a case of non-granulomatous anterior uveitis. Even if they do not have a typical picture of fibrin, it is imperative to rule out HLA-B27, because if we delay the diagnosis, the patient might have permanent deformities at the back. So, and these patients, 30% of them, they present first time to the ophthalmologist. So that's why to make a diagnosis, they may not need systemic treatment from the point of view of the ophthalmologist, but we need to refer them to the rheumatologist.
Dr. Abhilasha,
Yes.
like cases which are like typical of tubercular involvement, like serpiginous choroiditis or vasculitis.
Yes.
So, when in these cases, what criteria do we follow to refer these cases to start for AKT?
Sir, actually, I come from a place where we used to start ATT on our own. So, in the last 15 years, Dr. Amit sir is there. In Madurai, we used to start on our own, and I think that it's not difficult to start ATT on your own. Even if there is liver toxicity, we should know how to manage.
I
But
think
having said
Abhilasha,
that-
why he's asking is it is mandatory
What
now
are the
to
cases
refer the patients to a pulmonologist or a government.
we have to
this thing,
notify the
to notify
government.
them.
Yes, we have to notify.
No, my question is like when what are the criteria when you decide to start for AKT?
So,
Like the criteria is the HRCT, chest X-ray, Montague's chest, quantiferon gold, and like do we follow the COTS criteria? Like
Yes, I follow the COTS criteria, except that I do both Monto and quantiferon. COTS criteria says that you do either either Monto or quantiferon. But I've seen that in our population, it is very difficult to just rely on one test, because sometimes the Monto might be negative or sometimes the quantiferon might be negative. So even if one is positive, I go ahead and do an HRCT chest. On HRCT, if there is a calcified granuloma, if there are lesions with tree in bud appearance, or if there are lymph nodes with calcification, or there are fibrotic scars, then these are signs of active infection in the lung, and I'd start with ATT. Suppose Monto is positive, quantiferon is negative, there is nothing on HRCT chest, and the eye signs are not typical, then I do not start these patients on ATT. Then we have to look for other causes. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Great presentation, ma'am. I have one question.
Yes.
I just one question for you. Like you showed a case of scleritis, which you labeled as fungal. So how do you differentiate between different infectious scleritis? Just one.
So that case we had actually scraped. We had scraped and sent for microbiology and then diagnosed. The other case where I showed the suppuration, I did not scrape, because the corneal infiltrates were typical and she had a saddle nose. So I did a blood test and we got Cianca positive and diagnosed it at Wegener's and treated with biologics.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just one last question, ma'am. In TB granuloma, do you start steroid with AKT? And any response of anti-VEGF with intravitreal moxifloxacin that you've tried?
That is actually, that's a very good question. I don't give oral steroids for TB granulomas. So TB granulomas respond very well to just AKT. You give ATT and they'll respond. Some of them are vascular. You can see the vascularity. You can see those tortuous vessels along with the granuloma. In those cases, you can give intravitreal anti-VEGF. No need for moxi actually, intravitreal.
Intravitreal anti-VEGF monthly or say fortnightly?
Depends on response. It's not like we have to give 3 injections like we give in CNVM. So I give 1 injection or sometimes 2 injections, depends on the response. It is not mandatory because there are no guidelines. So it is all based on clinical response.
Very nice presentation, ma'am. One or two questions only. So if we are seeing the routine scleritis cases, what is the panel of investigation you advise if a patient is coming with the recurrent redness and we are suspecting scleritis at his only?
Okay. So if we say cases of non-necrotizing scleritis, which is alternating bilateral, then we have to look into cases of autoimmune scleritis. Okay, so if it is a female patient, I do ANA profile. Okay, and sometimes diseases like SLE, scleroderma, they can also come up in the ANA profile where you can get anti-dsDNA, anti-centromere positive. Then ANCA, C-ANCA, P-ANCA, you have to get that done. Then RA factor is not very useful. Anti-CCP antibodies is more useful in diagnosing early rheumatoid arthritis. RA factor, we all make the mistake of writing RA factor, but RA factor is better used for monitoring. So we must do anti-CCP antibodies. So these 3 tests I always do if I'm looking for non-infectious cases. If the case is unilateral, consistently only one eye is getting affected, you see some corneal, then I look for TB. I look for a corneal sensation and try to rule out viral scleritis.
And another question is, other than HLA-B27, which other HLA typing you uses for?
HLA-B51 we use just for supportive diagnosis if you are suspecting Behçet's, but it is not diagnostic in our population. The sensitivity is very low in Indian population. But then if you get HLA-B51 positive in a typical clinical picture, you feel more confident in treating as Behçet's.
Behçet's. Thank you very much.